you know, we can't tell how much oil we've got left. He's a peak oiler. He says we can't tell how much oil we've got left because all the forecasts are developed by the Saudis, and you can't trust the Saudis. He's right. But you also, as you may have learned, can't trust the meteorological office about a barbecue summer these last few weeks. Yeah, the Saudis are telling lies, but most forecasters anyway are not able to get it all right. I said we can forecast that tomorrow will be Sunday, but to forecast the oil reserves is a difficult business. If you look at the balance of probabilities and you look at it all, there's no doubt that the world is not heading for an oil crash, at least for the next 20 or 30 years. I think most of the clever peak oilers think that it's 20 or 30 years away. With new technology, much depends on politics and economics and technology, and not least international relations, especially around the Middle East. With new technology, it could be 40 or 50 years. So, you know, I'm not convinced. What I'm convinced by is that when oil was going up to $140 a barrel, peak oilers were going mad because their economics says, you know, if the price is going up, that's because it's scarce. You know, brilliant. And now it's at $70. And recently, having revived a bit from $35, peak oilers have had a little bit more of an outing. Right? But scarcity is a very weak theory of economics. Right? There's nothing about that. There are no diamonds, so diamonds are expensive. There's no oil, so oil is expensive. Yeah, that's the whole of economics. Right? As if Adam Smith or Ricardo or Marx or Keynes or Schumpeter had never existed. Right? All it is a supply and demand question. So I'm not really with that. Now, your question was, remind me?
My question was that which of these alternative energies or anything are the ones they put the most money into and the most promising?
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, yeah, it's a very good question. The answer is pretty much all of them. Right. The Chinese, in particular, are doing a lot in wind, a lot in nuclear, a lot in solar. I don't know how much they're doing in geothermal, and I don't think they're doing much in tidal. But in wind and solar, they are advancing their targets. They're moving ahead faster. And I think China is the lead manufacturer of solar panels in the world now. The lead, I think it's the lead producer of solar power, which is slightly different, you know, because it's exporting a lot of the panels. And they are now building wind farms in the, is it the Gobi Desert? No, that's in Africa, isn't it?
Gobi's in China.
It isn't, yeah, no, it isn't Gobi, yeah. And they got a problem, pardon me, it is the Gobi Desert. They got a problem there, which is you have to put workers up to clean the blades because there's so much dust around. In the Gobi Desert, there's nothing else around, so it's quite a good place to have wind turbines. But you're still dealing with manual techniques there, which is a bit of a problem. Now, obviously they face certain advantages, namely if the Stalinist regime there says this must happen, you know, broadly you can't have any dissent. You know. They also take engineering a bit seriously. And I'm sure they will make many mistakes, but one thing I'm also sure of, they'll be through the cold period much faster than we have been in the West. They don't have to go through the whole of the 19th century and most of the 20th century, and to be in the position of Poland, America, South Africa, Russia, Germany, all of these, India, all of these places. They will be through that in 20 or 30 years. And then the renewables and the nuclear will make more of a difference. At the moment, nuclear is very small in China, and wind and solar are pretty small. It is mostly coal,
yeah.
and that's bad news. But with CCS, it wouldn't be such bad news. And I think we'll be learning a lot from them in the next 20 or 30 years. Now, we had some other ones. Yes, come to you.
I was just going to ask, you made an example of John Kennedy's speech there. What was the most recent inspiring or intelligent speech you heard from a politician or engineer or whoever?
Well, I don't think I've heard many from politicians for a very long time. I think there are certain scientific heroes I have who are not orators, but have set an example in taking on risks. One of them is Barry Marshall, the Australian who discovered that ulcers are not to do with stress, or what the Americans call information fatigue syndrome, otherwise known as work, but they were to do with bacteria, and he found that out. He gave himself That's it, you're on it. Another one is Furchgold, a Chicago medic, who identified a substance in blood, which he further identified was nitric oxide. That's NO rather than NO2. That made an enormous difference to cardiovascular treatment, to understanding of the blood, and also it laid the basis for Viagra, which I regard as progress.
Have you heard of Dr. Werner Forssmann, who won the Nobel Prize?
No, I think Furchgold was a Nobel Prize.
Dr. Werner Forssmann won the Nobel Prize, I think it was about 56. He had to ignore his departmental chief and tie his assistant to an operating table to prevent his interference.
Oh, I want that.
He
Very
basically pioneered cardiac catheterization. He basically, as I say, ignored his departmental chief and tied his assistant to an operating table, inserted a urinary catheter into a vein in his leg, advanced it through into his heart until he found it touched, and then walked up 2 flights of stairs to take the conferatory film in the X-ray department.
Well, it's funny so many examples are medical, actually, because I don't know anything about medicine.
It's because self-experimentation.
Yeah.
Is kind of it's one of these, as long as you're not killing anyone but yourself.
Yeah.
The problem, I suppose, tends for risks that could expand beyond.
Well, the final one I have is a Dutchman, actually, Willem Kolff, who he invented the first kidney dialysis machine in 1945, and he did it. He saved the lives of about 800 Jews during the war, and then he collected together the plastic bits that keep sausages together, plus some Luftwaffe fighter parts, and made out of these bits a kidney dialysis machine. He saved the life of a Nazi woman in the Netherlands in 1945. And then he went on to establish the first heart transplant, I think. No, the first artificial heart, around 1962, and there was a big outcry about it, for ethical reasons. So these were people who ran enormous risks, in fact, during the war, or the risk of being, Furchgold didn't, but the other ones did. And I think, what we need is, we need a sense of these heroes. We need to re-establish science and technology as a heroic endeavour, with some great individuals who were brave and, fantastic guys, and who make today's politicians look very, very small. I think if we can do that, then we won't be so cynical about what human beings can achieve. We need role models. We need people to look up to. Got to find them. So if you can help me find them, I'd be delighted, and I'll certainly take that credit.
Well, we discussed, I think, this a couple of meetings back with Mike Darwin from Alpha.
From where?
From Alpha Cryogenics.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, you're talking about that. Now, we'll take one more, I think, then I think we've had enough. But I would, if you can write to me, james@woodhuysen.com, with any of those references, I'd really appreciate it if you found it useful. The other thing is, there's no London transport today because they're repairing it, so I spent £36 getting it in a cab here.
No tubes are running?
Well, my one isn't.
Oh, right.
If each of you has £1, I'd very much value it, if you valued the talk. If you didn't, then that's fine. But it would help me out, actually.
Unfortunately, you must take cards.
Well, I won't take a card. I'm sorry, I was going to sell you £10 worth of books, so I think you're getting off quite lightly, if you can. Yes, sir.
Right, so the question I was asking, you were suggesting that individuals can't do much, and I certainly agree when it's silly faffing around like changing the light bulbs. But one thing that's coming up fairly soon, I think, is switching to electric cars, and that might do a whole lot for carbon dioxide from cars, and it might also have interesting knock-on effects on the electric infrastructure, which can put downside more strain on it than they're anticipating.
What you're doing is pushing the carbon footprint upstream.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, except that you can plug it into nukes. But
If there are any.
Yeah. But then that's going to exacerbate the problem of there not being any nukes, and of course it's going to put strain on the electric wiring to houses and things like that. So it's going to be an interesting change, and I think that's likely to happen, and not for the sort of silly green